Welcome to the Gospel Chariot Podcast with Greg Smith. Join me for theological ramblings, thoughts, Bible classes, sermons, and an occasional guest. If you're searching for a confident relationship with God, if you're seeking clarity in your eternal purpose, you have found the right podcast. Let's open God's Word and hear His message. And may the Holy Spirit direct my words and enrich your hearing.
Good morning. So today we're in Genesis chapter 42, and in that Joseph story, it's a really incredible chapter, and it's kind of one of my favorites because of the secrets that are in the chapter. When I was with Diane, we went on a cruise, and I think we were at the island of Mykonos. I'm not sure about that, but I think that's where we were. And we were on this bus, and I think I've got all of my facts right. I may have the story confused. If I do, I will know it in just a minute because she's looking at me. So we were on this bus, and they were taking us down. I think they were taking us down to this beach. And what had happened is the buses were supposed to go in, and one bus was supposed to unload, I think, and that bus was supposed to come out, and then the next bus was supposed to go in because the turnaround there was really, really tight. And what happened is a bus went down to unload, then another bus went down behind it, another bus went down behind it. They all got jammed up down there. There wasn't enough room to turn around. The road going down there was really narrow, so two buses couldn't pass each other. And so they got all of these buses stacked up in this turnaround, and we were in a mess. I mean, it was like traffic jam extraordinaire. And Diane and I were sitting up toward the front of the bus. And there was the driver, and I don't know what this other guy was. He wasn't a guard, but there was a guy that was standing there that I guess he was there to help people on and off of the bus. He was by the door. And we're standing up by the front, and they start talking to one another in Greek. Now, I don't understand a lot of modern Greek, but I can pick up a few things. Like I can kind of catch on to some phrases. And I thought they were going to be talking about all of these Americans and all of these cruise people who came up and clogged in their city and how mad they were at us. And that's what I thought the conversation that I was going to hear would be about. But instead, the conversation was about the bus drivers who drove down there and they weren't supposed to, and how can I phrase this right? How unintelligent they were. That's about the best way I can say it. And I thought it was fascinating because I'm sitting there and they're talking, and I really think with the words that they were using, they didn't think anybody around could understand what they were saying. And I was sitting there, and I was kind of chuckling, and Diane said, "What are you laughing at?" And I'm like, "I'm laughing at the conversation because they're this is what they're talking about." And when I think about secrets, and I think about Genesis 42, I think about that kind of story that's in my life because there's a couple of things happening in Genesis chapter 42. There's these secrets. Joseph's brothers have still not told their dad the secret about Joseph. And Joseph, in chapter 42, recognizes his brothers, but his brothers don't recognize him. And we go through the chapter, and they don't understand that Joseph can understand what they're saying. And one of the things that they're going to say in this chapter is, it's because of our brother. If we hadn't treated him the way that how he said, how he begged us not to hurt him, and then what we did. And Joseph, the whole time, he looks Egyptian. He's using an Egyptian translator. They have no idea that it's Joseph, and the secret in the chapter is that Joseph understands all the things that they're saying, but they don't know that Joseph can understand what they're saying. This is a picture of an Enigma machine. I don't know how many of you know about Enigma machines, but Enigma machine is a German machine. I'm going to try to explain it with the little bit of knowledge that I have. Okay, so if you want a really detailed explanation about this thing, you're going to have to Google it later because I'm not smart enough to explain it. There are people in here smart enough to explain it. It's just not me. Okay, so I'm going to do the best I can. This was a machine that was developed by the Germans right after World War I, and it was originally intended for banks and business transactions. But the German military got a hold of it when they figured out how incredibly valuable it was. And through the 30s and the 40s, they started building more complicated versions of this machine. And it was an encryption device. Now, for just the sake of simplicity, it had these dials in it. And when you would, you would start out with, it had these things on the front of it. What are those called? You would plug it in, right? It had these plug-ins on the front. You'd have to plug it in a certain order on a certain day, and they would tell you what that was. And then when you pushed a button, it would send an electrical impulse into that machine, and it would use, like if you pushed an A, it might type a B. And if you pushed AA, well, A is not a good example because of what happened with that letter in the machine. Let's say, well, just use X, and you just kept pushing X. Every time you pushed X, it would give you a different letter because every time you pushed it, a signal would go in that machine, a little electronic signal. It'd move one of the it would move one of the rotors, and then it would start typing different things. Right? And the Germans thought there is no way anybody can ever encrypt our messages. No, nobody can ever translate those. We are completely safe in everything that we send out. And so they had that machine during World War II, except the Americans and the British learned how to decipher it. Now, we talk about the British and the Americans, but actually the beginning work started with some Polish scientists, and then right before Poland fell to the Germans, they took all of their research and all of their information, and they gave it to the English, and the English built on it. There have been movies about this. Alan Turing developed this machine that would kind of go through and give them all of the things that they didn't think would work, all of the impossibilities, so we got to where we could interpret their messages. Now, that happened for a couple of reasons. One is there's like some really smart people who are working on it, like computer people and problem solvers, chess players. I mean, people who really knew how to analyze things. And they built this machine to kind of help decipher all of those messages. It also helped that we captured a couple of those devices, so that kind of helped out as well. But there were little phrases that the Germans would always use. They would always use certain phrases within it, or they would also, after they gave a list of commands, I think this is true from what I've read, is they would also give a weather report. So they would take what they called a crib, and a crib was like a phrase that they knew was probably in there somewhere, and they would analyze the crib by this fancy machine that they made, and it would go through and it would decipher the German messages. Now, it's really cool because all of the times the Germans are making military plans and they think they're secret, but they're not secret because they don't know that the Americans are listening in. And it changed all kind of things. It changed how we move supplies in the North Atlantic. We could figure out where their U-boats were going and where they were going to be stationed. It had incredible implications for D-Day and where troops were going to be, and even false information that we sent out about where we were going besides the place that we were really going to go. And it probably shortened the war by several years. I mean, anything like that would be a guess. But the thing about it is things weren't encrypted as well as they thought that they were encrypted because we knew what was being said. We knew how to plan. And it was an incredible thing that happened during the World War II era. So we start thinking about secrets or things that we hold in our heart or things that we say. And the first thing I want you to know about that is God understands the language of your heart. You know, Joseph's brothers, they're speaking in a language that they think Joseph can't understand. They think that when they're speaking, that Egyptian ruler doesn't know what's being said. They're not even aware that it's their brother. And if we're not careful, we can go through life and we can assume that our hearts speak a language that God doesn't understand, but that's not ever true. You know, we can come to church and we can smile. And we can smile all the time that we're mad about something. Have y'all noticed that? Or we can come into church and we can say, man, everything's just fine. Everything's wonderful. Except everything's not really wonderful. And when we start dealing with people, sometimes we can hide how we really feel. Our heart can say, our mouth can say one thing, but at the same time our mouth says one thing, our heart is expressing something else. And we convince ourselves that nobody really knows how we feel because we can keep that hidden. We can keep it tucked away in the secret parts of our heart. We can keep it tucked away where nobody really understands the way that we really feel or what we really think. Except it's not true with God. God understands the language of our heart. You know, one of the greatest verses I think that illustrates this is from the book of Romans. It says, in the same way the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groans that words cannot express. And he who searches our hearts knows the minds of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints in accordance with God's will. And the important part of that is the one who searches our hearts. Do you remember David when he is getting ready to die? He's on his deathbed, and he calls his son Solomon in. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought about like what would you say to your children on your deathbed? Like my brain has never really gone there yet. But that's David's position. And he's talking to Solomon, and he says, and you, my son Solomon, acknowledge the God of your father and serve him with a wholehearted devotion and with a willing mind. For the Lord searches every heart and understands every motive behind the thoughts. That's one of my two favorite verses. My other favorite verses is Daniel chapter 10, verse 12. So if you ever want to know Greg's favorite verses, Daniel chapter 10, verse 12. Eli, that's what I wrote on your door frame. And this verse in 1 Chronicles. That God understands every motive behind the thought. Man, if that doesn't cause you to just kind of stop and ponder for a minute, have you ever had a thought and wondered, well, I wonder where that came from? Like, I wonder why I thought that. I wonder why I reacted this way in this situation, or I wonder why this particular thing happened. Do you understand that God knows the motive behind your thought? Like, there is nothing hidden from his knowledge. Now, in one way, that might cause us an incredible amount of fear, because in one way we might want to say, I wish God didn't know everything that my heart said. Like, would you want other people to know everything that you really think? Like how you really respond internally to everything that happens? Because I'm pretty sure I don't want y'all to know all of that. Like, I'd like to keep some of that pretty quiet. I'd like to keep it pretty secret. But God speaks the language of your heart. God already knows that. You can't hide it from him. It's already there. He already knows. So when we start thinking about secrets, there are secrets that we can have from a lot of people, but they're not secrets that we can have from God. And so when you start thinking about that, I think about how many times we hide behind Christian language. Like we throw this language out there, and the language is good. But we also have to really consider, okay, when I put the language out there, what's really behind it? What's really the thought process? For Joseph's brothers, they're still hiding a secret from their father, aren't they? Like, they know that Joseph really didn't get eaten up by that animal, but they've never told him. They're carrying this anguish in their heart, this fear. We'll touch upon this a little bit more later in the sermon, this fear about when is God going to really get them. And we can do something pretty similar to that. I mean, have you ever thought about, like, the words we throw out? I mean, just the words. We throw out words like, well, I'll be praying for you. I'll be praying for you. Now, is that a good phrase? Y'all can do like this. That's a really, really good phrase. If you really mean the phrase. Like, right, if you're really going to be praying for them, or you're really going to be concerned about them. We come into church and somebody says, well, how are you doing? Well, man, I'm just blessed. I'm just blessed. Could be. You could be. But sometimes we'll use a word like that or a phrase like that to tell everybody how great we are, but deep inside we're not nearly as great as we're letting on. Or we can come in and we can quote scripture and we can read Bible verses. But then inside us, maybe our heart is speaking a different kind of language. And what I mean by that is just to help you understand, God is not really impressed by He's not really impressed by our religious vocabulary. Like, God doesn't listen to the words. God listens to what's in our hearts. I love Ananias and Sapphira as an example here. Y'all remember Ananias and Sapphira? So let's just get the story straight. Barnabas sold a field. And Barnabas takes the money from selling the field, and he brings the money, and he lays it at the apostles' feet. Now, let's just imagine, for Clarksville Highway right now, we're going to try to make this kind of as practical as we can. I don't own a field I could sell, but I need somebody who's got a field. Somebody got a field. Anybody got a field? Somebody out there. You got a field, buddy? How big of a field is it? Big field. Oh, buddy got a big field. So, just for the sake of argument, buddy, let's say you can get $1 million for your field. So, buddy says, I've been watching things and life, and I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out and I'm going to sell my field. His big field, right? He's going to get $1 million for his big field. And he's going to take his money from his big field, and he's going to come into the elders meeting, and he's going to say, listen, guys, I sold a piece of property, and I've given the money to the church. And the people in the church would probably say, that was a really good thing to do. And let's say, well, I hate to do it this way because I don't want to get in trouble, but let's say I was watching that, and I thought, boy, that buddy likes so buddy because he sold his field, and he gave a whole bunch of money. I think I'm going to go sell me a field. And I went and sold a field, and I got my money for my field. My field's not as big as Buddy's, so I just get $500,000 for my field. And I sell my field. And I come to church, and I say, I tell you what I'm going to do. Just like Buddy, I'm going to give all my money to the church. Going to lay it all down there. There it is. Except what happened? Their words said, what did their words say? We gave it all. That's what the word said. Now, is the problem that they didn't give it all, or the problem that they lied about it? The problem is they lied about it. Even Peter said, hey, the money was yours. You can do with it whatever you want, but you didn't do with it what you said you did with it. The problem was the lie. So they said, we gave all, but God knew something different was going on, didn't he? God knew they didn't really give it all. And all I'm asking is sometimes when we hide behind that language, we have to be very careful, because when we say the word, God just doesn't know the word. God knows what's in our heart. God knows what we're really thinking. And that can be really confusing at times, really fearful at times, and it can be really comforting at times. And sometimes what happens is we forget who's listening. We forget who's listening. I'm trying to tell you a story without telling somebody's name because I don't want to embarrass him or his family. But I had this friend who he was talking on the phone, and he was talking to a client, and he was really nice on the phone while he was talking with the client about all the things he was going to do and all the things he was going to make happen. And then he really didn't feel that way. So after It was a cell phone. And after he thought he hung up the phone, he said something about the person he was doing the business for, except the person that he said something about was still on the phone. And this is probably too much information, but if he didn't learn his lesson there, he did it again. And that didn't work out so well. And sometimes it's just we kind of forget who's listening. Like, would it make a difference if you knew that God was always listening? Would it make a difference? Would it make a difference if you knew, I'm not picking on anybody here, but would it make a difference if you knew that everything you scrolled by on social media and you paused on, that God was pausing on that with you? Or every like that you sent out, everything that you liked. What if everything that you liked on social media, you were not liking for yourself, you were saying God liked it? Would you still like everything that you currently like? Like, would you still pause on everything you currently pause on? Like when you're scrolling through those reels or whatever you text. Would you still text the same thing if you knew God, like he was like, and this is true, by the way, that like every text that you sent, that God also read the text? Would you text the same thing? Would you whisper the same thing under your breath? Like when JR and I are talking about something, and this is not really true, JR, but you hang with me, all right? And JR and I are talking about something on the phone, and that's the end of the 2-hour conversation. I love you, brother. This is the end of the 2-hour conversation, and I hang up the phone, and I say, would I still say that if I knew God was going to tell JR what I just said? And by the way, I don't do that very often, JR, but occasionally. How about what we joke about? Or what we laugh about, or what we complain about? If we knew God was listening to every one of those conversations, would every conversation say the same thing? And so Jesus comes along and he makes this statement, for out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. That is one. I've told you the passages that I really, really like. Now I'm telling you a passage that I really wish he hadn't put in there. Now, it's a true passage, isn't it? Y'all can nod like this. It's true, but am I really excited about it all the time? I mean, do I always want to stop and say, well, the reason that I made the statement that I just made is because that's what my heart's really thinking? I'd rather not sometimes, to be honest with you, because there are no secrets between us and God. And what happens as we go through life sometimes is we often misjudge who God is using. What do you think the brothers looked at Joseph and saw? They just saw an Egyptian official. I think probably Joseph was dressed like an Egyptian, probably looked like an Egyptian. He probably spoke in the Egyptian language, which is why he had an interpreter. And they never imagined that God had placed their own brother right in front of them. I don't think they ever realized until Joseph made himself known, which is going to be next week. Okay, so just hang on to that. I don't think they ever recognized who God was using. And I think sometimes in our life, the same thing happens. We never realize the one that God is using to shape us. We never know who God has put into our life to help us understand perspective or understand what's important or to bring blessing into our life or to help us wrestle with some inner demon. And often I think the person that God uses doesn't really look like the person we expect. You ever had something about your life shaped by a difficult boss? Like, how many of you like difficult bosses? Like, I never liked a difficult boss, but I learned things through difficult bosses. or a skeptical neighbor or a difficult neighbor or a new Christian? Has anybody in this auditorium ever learned something just by the statement of a child? Just the simple way that they look at life, and you hear a child say something and you think, why didn't I think of that? Or you encounter some stranger, somebody you don't even know, and that stranger does something that shapes your thinking or shapes your outlook on life or shapes the way that you view God or shapes your spiritual journey. And I think most of the time we don't really recognize who God is using because we're looking at all of these outward appearances, but that's not what God is looking at. And sometimes in life, we just have to stop and pause and ask ourselves, how is God using the secrets in life to change us? And then there's this other thing that jumps out to me in this chapter. The guilt. The guilt. Remember, the core of this chapter is that Joseph can understand his brothers. I mean, he's using an interpreter. They're speaking in Hebrew. He's speaking in Egyptian, evidently. Having the interpreter interpret to them in Hebrew. Has no idea that he can understand what they're saying. They're standing before this Egyptian official, very powerful man. And isn't it cool in the chapter? What's one of the first things they do when they get in his presence? They bow down. And it says, Joseph remembered his dream. And it says, Joseph recognized his brothers, but his brothers didn't recognize him. And they're thinking about what has happened. And they're thinking about the things that are going on. He said, you're spies. I'm going to take you and put you in prison. One of you go back and get your younger brother and bring him back, and I'll let the rest of you out. Puts him in prison for 3 days, lets him out, says, well, I fear God. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll keep one of you in prison. The rest of you go back and bring your brother to me. And they're sitting there and they're listening to this Egyptian official say, this is what I'm going to do because this is the way I judge you. And the text says, surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us. And Reuben replied, didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy, but you wouldn't listen? And now we must give an accounting for his blood. And they did not realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. How many years? How many years? So we're probably, I'm going to do quick math, all right? He's 17, he's sold into slavery. He's 30 when he goes into Pharaoh's service. That's, I should have done this before the sermon, right? Y'all help me out. That's 17 years, right? We got 7 years of famine, so we're 24. Wait a minute, I messed that up, didn't I? 17 to 30 is 13 and 7, so we're 20. And we got, I forgot, how many years of famine did he say was left? I think he said 5. So we're 22, 20, 25, somewhere in there. The math doesn't matter that much. Y'all figure the math out at home when you get there. Here's what I want you to realize. How many years had they lived carrying the guilt in their heart, wondering when God was going to get them for what they did? And they had lived with that for years because they just told you, we have lived with that for years, wondering when God was going to get us for what we did. The guilt. How many of us are going through life wondering when God is going to get us for what we did? We're carrying something in the back of our mind, maybe something that happened years ago. And we're secretly wondering in the back of our mind, would God really forgive me for that? And this morning, I want you to know the answer to that question is yes. Yes. Because if we're not guilty, if we're not careful, we can take guilt and let it control our lives when God has already stepped in and said, I've forgiven you for that. I left that in the past. When God talks about you being a new creature, or a new beginning, or when God talks about wiping your sin away, or your sin being as far from the east as it is from the west, do you really believe that God cleansed you in that way? That you really started out with a clean slate? And then if you did start out with a clean slate and you got that part, how many of you started out with a clean slate and before long you messed the chalkboard up again? And then you're thinking, okay, how do I erase the chalkboard again? And God steps in through the marvelous gift of Jesus, and like He's continually erasing the chalkboard. I had this professor at Lipscomb. He spoke in a monotone, which was really hard to stay awake because it was like an early class. And he would write with this hand and erase with this hand on the board all at the same time. So unless you wrote down really quick, you didn't get anything, because he's like, and he'd start over like this right here. And you're thinking, what in the world? How am I supposed to take time to write all of that stuff? And it was really, really difficult. And when I envision God, that's what I envision. Here I am writing like this, and then I'm writing my life, and God's coming right behind me, and He's just erasing stuff that I put down the whole time. and the more I write, the more He erases. And He's just shaking His head thinking, I don't know why you wrote that on the board, but let me get that off really quick. That's how forgiveness through Jesus works. So God doesn't want us carrying the guilt. God sent Jesus into the world to die for our sin, so that we could have complete confidence in our relationship with Christ and erase the guilt that sometimes controls our lives. And I don't want to be like Joseph's brothers, and I don't want to carry guilt from year to year to year to year. I want to understand the forgiveness that comes only through Jesus. So I ask you, if you're sitting there this morning and you're speaking, and you don't think God can hear, but He can, what kind of things are you thinking? And isn't it wonderful to know that God, who understands every motive of your heart, also is the God who chooses through the blood of His Son to remove the guilt for every one of those thoughts? Isn't it a great God we serve? So don't carry the guilt. Find forgiveness in the blood of Jesus. And if you need to do that by confessing, repenting, being baptized, maybe you don't need that at all. Maybe you just need, you're a believer in Jesus, you just need a time of prayer. Maybe a time of prayer you talk to people, maybe a time of prayer that you're just completely quiet and just want to come up here to the front and somebody put their arm around you and pray. I just pray that you will find the peace that God sent to us through the blood of Jesus. If you need to respond, we can ask you to do that while we stand and sing.